Let's go ahead and kick this off. Welcome, everyone. This is Courts Under Attack, Judicial Nominations and the Future of Democracy. And this is the latest in a series of conversations we try to have with the general public, the pro-democracy community, about the challenges that we are facing and what we can all be doing to fight back against those challenges. And I have to tell you, I am absolutely thrilled that tonight I am joined by Rachel Rossi. She is the president of the Alliance for Justice, which is an absolutely essential organization. If you are not already familiar with the Alliance for Justice, please become familiar with them. They are one of the most important pro-democracy groups right now in the ecosystem, and we're going to have a really important conversation tonight about the future of the courts and what it means for democracy. As I mentioned, this is part of Democracy Docket's ongoing effort to look at courts from state benches to the Supreme Court and how they impact the rights and freedoms and futures of every American. And I just want to start by giving a special thanks to our partners at Alliance for Justice for sponsoring this discussion, but also for just their tireless work in defending judicial independence and accountability. The work they do every single day is making the courts fairer in this country, making them more transparent, making them more accountable. And so we owe them a huge debt of gratitude, not just for this event, but also for the work they do. Tonight, Rachel and I will talk about how judicial nominations shape our democracy, the attacks advocacy organizations like AFJ are facing, and what's at stake in the months ahead. Here is the deal. If you want to chat, put it in the thing that says chat. If, on the other hand, you want to ask a Q&A, drop that in the Q&A box. Now, we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can. We are aided by a wonderful staff here at Democracy Docket to curate these questions, to try to group these questions. And then after this event, we will share this recording with everyone who registered, which includes, like I said, the Zoom chat. So if you don't want your full name shared, please change it now. All right. So without further ado, I want to introduce my very special guest and co-traveler on this, Rachel Rossi. Welcome.
Thanks, Mark. It's so great to be here. And I just have to say, we love your team. We love the work that you're doing. And I'm loving seeing all the love in the audience. Really attests to the work that your team does. So thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's jump right into it. You know, Rachel, you wrote a very, very insightful op-ed for Democracy Docket about the Supreme Court, and you said it's continuing its anti-democratic work in cases not directly involving the Trump administration, and that's I think a very important observation, because people, I think, tend to focus on the Supreme Court cases that involve, like, Donald Trump's name in the caption, or that, you know, they understand to be a direct confrontation or a direct challenge to his authoritarian power grabs. But you point out that that's not the only anti-democratic work that is happening there. And so what do you see as the most dangerous trends in the court, and how does this impact communities across the country as we, you know, end the first full year, or not yet, I guess, actually. We are 10 months into the Trump administration.
Right. And, I'll start by saying I do think it is incredibly troubling what we are seeing with the Supreme Court when it comes to the Trump administration, when it comes to the dangerous trends related to expanding the power of the executive branch. We're seeing trends when it comes to, looking back to Trump v. Casa, obviously giving Trump broad immunity to act illegally, to the birthright citizenship case where we're, limiting and weakening the lower court's ability to issue nationwide injunctions. We've seen this consistent trend of sort of expanding the executive branch and sort of reducing the power of the checks and balances that even the courts have. But then beyond that, it's exactly right that the anti-democratic trends that we're seeing go beyond even just the cases where Trump might be named in the actual case. So, we're seeing the erosion of civil rights. We're seeing a trend that is very anti-LGBTQ. We've got a couple of cases this term where the court has taken up legal challenges to state laws barring transgender athletes from participating in girls and women's sports. We've got a case involving Colorado's ban on so-called conversion therapy, where the oral argument was not encouraging. And then finally, I think one of the most dangerous trends that we're seeing is the intention to restrict the right to vote. One of those cases, the Bost case, where a Representative Mike Bost seeking to crack down on mail-in ballots by preventing them from being counted simply for arriving late, even if they were postmarked before Election Day. And then, of course, the Calais case, which I know we'll get into. But I think that trend in and of itself is incredibly troubling.
Yeah, and I'm really glad, by the way, you brought up the Bost case, because I can't seem to get the legacy media and, frankly, enough people in the pro-democracy movement to pay attention to this case, right? We're going to talk about Calais, and everybody is going to be familiar with that. That's the redistricting case, the Section 2 case out of Louisiana. But thank you for shouting out the Bost case, which, as you say, is a direct threat on mail-in voting, which we know is so critical and a lifeline to people. But let's talk about the Calais case for a second. This is Calais. This is Louisiana versus Calais. And at stake there is the future of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which, by the way, was the section that Chief Justice Roberts promised was not going to be touched when Shelby County came out and gutted Section 5. Talk about what you see as the stakes in this case, and in particular, like, what is it going to mean for communities of color, for minority voters who, let's be honest, are being targeted every single day by this administration and their allies.
Right. And I'm sure most of the audience knows about the Calais case and what Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is. But just to kind of back up a little bit and talk about that, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act really is the last protection against racial discrimination and redistricting. And this case is so troubling for that reason. Right now, plaintiffs can sue under Section 2 and sort of require states to redraw maps in order to not dilute the votes of voters of color. Right now, Section 2 is really the only guarantee to communities of color to have a fair shot at electing people who actually represent them. So with this case, obviously, there's the direct sort of case in Louisiana, which we know is directly surrounding the question about whether Louisiana lawmakers violated the Constitution by creating a new electoral map, right? But I think, like you previewed, what's troubling about this case is that the Supreme Court has signaled that they are going to be considering more broadly whether Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act itself is even constitutional. So the stakes that we're looking at is best case scenario, probably the significant limitation of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, but most likely its entire elimination. And this is terrifying because this is going to really greenlight and give states the ability to redraw maps that silence the votes of communities of color. And so, when we talk about what does that mean for communities of color and what is that actual impact going to look like, I've seen some analysts talk about the Congressional Black Caucus potentially losing 1/3 of its seats.
Right.
The Congressional Hispanic Caucus, 10% of its seats. One report estimated about 19 congressional seats that are currently protected by the Voting Rights Act that could go away.
That was a fair fight report. Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so, when we take that sort of terrible landscape and we sort of add in this understanding, we're already seeing this rabid gerrymandering effort underway right now. So it's just going to get even worse if there's nothing to stop them from ignoring voters of color. So it's to me it's really a all hands on deck and dire situation. Section 2 is really the last vestige of the Voting Rights Act. And, I think of how Justice Ginsburg famously said that blocking the VRA is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm. And what we're seeing with this court is they want us to not only throw away our umbrella, but to like jump in the puddle and splash around while we're at it. So to me, it is really a dangerous moment for voting rights in this country, and specifically for voting rights for communities of color.
All right. So I have to ask you, because you run now the premier organization that both raises awareness around these issues, but also um, really focuses on, among other things, the judicial nominating process. And I think that sometimes people can get disconnected between what these cases are about, like because they hear a lot of like legal terms and it means this and this legally, and even they will hear what it may mean practically for certain communities, but they don't necessarily see that connection to the judicial nominees fights. And so draw that line for us.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it's such a good point because just understanding this landscape is complex, even for lawyers who are practicing in court every day, right? When we talk about the Supreme Court jargon intended to confuse audiences. But you're absolutely right. So there's this, we at the Alliance for Justice, one big piece of our work is education and information, and that includes making sure that we are sounding the alarm on cases like this and making it plain what the impact will be, so that, more broadly, the public is aware and can sort of jump into the fight. To us, education and awareness is one of the first steps toward coalition and power building. And we are an alliance of over 135 nonprofit organizations. Our members have expertise from LGBTQ plus rights to immigrant rights to reproductive justice. So one of the things that we aim to do is to educate, empower, and harness the power of our membership organizations so that we can bring the public into this fight with us. And you talked about the judicial nominations piece. We do a lot of in-depth research and draft background reports on judicial nominees to make that exact linkage. In fact, we just actually published recently on our website this section where we are breaking down the harm of the Trump administration judges in the second term in direct sort of plain language. This is the harm that we're seeing. So we have to be able to do more of that for those of us who are in these spaces to really kind of break it down so that the public can join in and advocate and be a part of the solution.
Yeah, and look, you're gonna hear me say this a few times. If you have not already checked out their website and their reports, you need to do that. You can do that now. We will put a link in the description, in the chat, and also when we send this out, so that people can look at this themselves. But the work that you guys are doing, both as an organization, but also, as you say, as a coalition organization, is important right now because, frankly, there are too few organizations willing to step forward and fight against Donald Trump's authoritarianism. I mean, the truth is, many of you out there ask me all the time, what are the organizations on the front lines? And I say there are fewer organizations on the front lines now that I would have thought a year from now, when there were a lot of organizations saying they'd be on the front lines. But when a lot of organizations took a step back, one of the things that Rachel did and that AFJ did is they took a step forward. And in order to do that, though, they need your support. So I want to thank them for being a partner with us here tonight and being a sponsor of this event. But I really encourage everyone who is watching this video to check them out and to lend your support to them. I want to pick up, though, on your last point, which is that, the damage that can be done here is not necessarily just limited to what we are seeing done today. I mean, what's being done today is terrible. I mean, look at what we're seeing in the streets all around the country with the military. Look at what we're seeing in the erosion of civil rights and human rights. I mean, that is terrible. But one of the things that you have written about is that this term could give them more opportunities to diminish the power of people, not just in the today, but that in, over a longer time horizon. So talk a little bit about that.
I think that's exactly right. And one piece of it is the Supreme Court rulings and the actions of the administration that are really weakening the power of the people and demolishing a lot of our institutions. Things like firing independent agency heads, things like eliminating federal agencies and firing federal employees. A lot of damage to the power of the people that I think we will be it will take some time to build back and to build uh, to bring back a lot of these core elements of democracy. But one of the things that we center on at AFJ that's such a critical piece of this are the federal judicial nominees, which these are lifetime appointments. So when we look at judicial nominees, that's how we're thinking about our strategy in opposing some of these terrible nominees. Some of the things that we're seeing right now in the second Trump administration is judicial nominees that are increasingly ideological
Mhm.
and louder
Absolutely.
about it, right? Like they're not
Proud about it.
proud
I mean,
about
like
it,
they're like
right?
they're boasting about it.
Right. Like you remember the days when there used to be the little nod towards, well, I will be bipartisan,
Right.
or, I'll consider. That's not even part of the conversation at this point, right? Then we're seeing them be increasingly unqualified, people who've never been on the bench, making it to circuit courts, people who have way less than 10 years of practice. We're also seeing them being riddled with ethical violations in their past and accusations, which, sometimes is easy to breeze past because there's so many bad things about these nominees. And
Right,
then,
which used to be a disqualifier. Like literally,
right,
even the hint of anything used to be on a bipartisan basis. They'd think, was just a absolute no-go.
right, right. And now it's almost even like we don't even have time to get to that because there's so many other bad things about these nominees, right? And to me, the last through line of these judicial nominees, sort of going back to your question of how is this going to impact us for generations to come, is that they have a deep through line of loyalty to President Trump and not to the rule of law, right? We're seeing nominees who, in their hearings and questionnaires, won't answer the basic question of who won the 2020 election.
Wow.
That is
Wow.
troubling.
Yeah.
We're seeing senators asking questions about, can Trump do anything he wants? Can he do illegal actions? And they're not willing to say no. And so that's troubling in and of itself. But then you have nominees, I'll give you an example. I'm sure you recall the Amil Bobie nomination now confirmed to the Third Circuit. I think he's just one example, but this is a nominee who was Trump's personal lawyer, came to DOJ and fired all the January 6th prosecutors, was a key architect of the deportation scheme under the Alien Enemies Act. Um, and when courts tried to intervene in that action, whistleblowers came forward and said that Amil Bobie told them to ignore court orders and to tell judges "f you." So this is the type of nominee that we're seeing now, where there's still the ideological, concerning ideological positions and sort of attempts to. Sorry, I'm losing my sound here. To erode civil rights and the ideological stances, but then on top of that, this sort of willingness to disregard the rule of law and just obey Trump is very terrifying.
Well, and isn't this part of a broader context about these judicial nominees that really are very different looking than we have seen? I mean, there's always been a sense that, okay, this person is more conservative, appointed by a Republican president. This person's more liberal, appointed. But this is like a whole other level. But isn't this um, sort of, I don't want to say responsible, but isn't this part of a broader context of judicial nominations and the growing politicization of the courts? I mean, when you put on personal lawyers and people without any experience who won't say who won the 2020 election.
Right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And you can't ignore the judicial nominees in the broader context of what we're seeing when we're seeing this sort of attempt to erode democracy, attempt to empower a president and reduce the power of civil society, of academic institutions, of government agencies, of independent investigation arms of those agencies. So absolutely, it's this increased politicization of these nominees as part of that broader strategy to make Trump a king and to erode the checks and balances that are core to our democracy. So, that's why we at AFJ are trying to bring more into this fight with us. And I thank you for making that ask of this fantastic audience, because we got to all be in this together, and we have to be louder and stand more firmly against these really terrible nominees.
Yeah, so I have a like almost a it's like part a philosophical question and part a logistics question. So I mentioned that there are a lot of organizations that are not as brave as they once were. You all are. Um, and you're obviously being flooded now with more and more unqualified nominees. So like, how do you monitor and challenge all the unqualified nominees? Because I assume it's a lot of resources. You've got fewer allies doing it along with you. The Trump administration's not made it any easier. I mean, I know they've they no longer even give the ABA, access to the information the ABA used to get. How do you do this?
So one of the beauties of AFJ is we've actually been doing it for over 45 years. Now, this is a different moment, right? So
Yeah, it's
our
a
approaches,
much bigger moment.
yes, quite a scary moment. And so I'll just have to shout out our team, our incredible team who have been thinking about how do we pivot in this moment and how do we use the tools that we have to be responsive. So, one of the things we've always done and continue to do is we conduct the in-depth trusted research on every single nominee. So you can go to our website to the judicial nominees section, and we are consistently churning out the names of nominees once they're named, sometimes even before they're officially nominated, as soon as we get the name, and then we're doing that research. Then we do all that we can to advocate, sometimes quietly behind the scenes, sometimes loudly with our coalition partners. That includes, social media campaigns, organizing campaigns. It includes letters to the Hill and advocacy on the Hill, and really being very strategic in this moment about how do we look at other strategies and how do we look at other tools to at least even slow down some of the nominations, because I think even slowing down some of that process is partially a win.
It's definitely a win. I mean, I keep having this fight with people. They think that the only wins are if they are wins permanent forever and evermore. Like that just isn't the way you deal with an authoritarian regime. If you can have wins that are less than totally complete, but which throw sand in the gears or slow something down or give another set of plaintiffs a fairer judge while this new judge is being confirmed, like we all have to view those as wins. We cannot have this worldview that, like I said, unless it's a permanent win for forevermore, that somehow it's a failure. And so by that measure, I think there are a lot of organizations succeeding more than they're given credit for. None who deserves more credit than you. And on that front, I want to sort of switch topics to what is a very, very serious one, and one that, gets attention a lot. We have seen attacks on our largest institutions. We've seen attacks on the big law firms. We saw attacks on the universities. We've seen attacks on the legacy, the large media companies. We're seeing attacks now on nonprofit and advocacy groups. And to be honest with you, the record on the first group of those is kind of mixed. The largest law firms capitulated, or enough, at least four of them did. A number of them did. I'm sorry, not four, nine of them did, or 11 of them did. And that was terrible. We've seen large conglomerates, capitulate. We've seen billionaires, show up at the White House with a checkbook saying, "What would you like, and what would you like me to say?" So we've seen really problematic behavior by a lot of gatekeepers who we thought were here to protect democracy. And Donald Trump has made clear that he wants to come after nonprofit organizations and advocacy groups. And he's being very upfront about that fact. And so you and your members, frankly, stand at the center of that. And it's the reason why I wanted to do this event. It's the reason why I am so proud to be partnering with you on this event, and that you write for Democracy Docket and that you've sponsored this event. And it's why, like I said, everyone has to support your organization, because there are too few organizations willing to stand at the center of this without backing away and cowering. And you're one of the few. So, talk to us about what these challenges are like for you. What has it led to a chilling of and censorship? Has it silenced dissent among nonprofits? I know it's not silencing you, but what do you see out there?
Yeah, and I do think it's one of the attacks that is probably lesser focused on, the attacks on the nonprofit and civil society community. But one of the other programs that AFJ leads that we're incredibly thrilled to be at the helm of is our Boulder Advocacy Program. which we're actually the national kind of expert when it comes to compliance for 501c3 and C4 organizations, so nonprofit organizations. And so one of the things that I think we've been feeling as an organization and what we've tried to do through the tools we have in support of other nonprofits is the more that we are dotting our I's, crossing our T's, and ensuring that we are in compliance, the louder and the more bold we can be, right? So, I'll just say what we're actually seeing nonprofits face in this moment. We're seeing executive orders, targeting ending DEI programs. More than that, we're seeing illegal federal funding cuts for nonprofit organizations. We've even seen infiltration attempts of nonprofit
Really?
organizations. Yes, one probably the more notable one, the Vera Institute, where they try to sort of put a Doge employee in an actual nonprofit organization. We've seen a lot of talk and threats about overhauling the Treasury and IRS to make it easier for the executive branch to strip tax exempt status. We've seen congressional oversight hearings, investigations, criminal investigations. And I think, like you said, the constant misinformation and fear mongering campaign, where it's painting nonprofit organizations as these violent terrorist organizations, when that is not the case. When nonprofits are serving the community, when nonprofits are the advocates, are the organizers in this moment, and when nonprofits, quite honestly, when federal programs are being cut, like SNAP benefits will be next week, nonprofits are the ones that the community relies on even more, right? So our Boulder Advocacy Program, through the program, we have online resources, webinars, trainings where we help nonprofits so that they can do assessments and they can understand and know that they are in compliance. We also have a hotline that nonprofit organizations can call. And we are very thrilled that, sort of doubling down on this work in this moment, we recently launched a partnership with We the Action, which is another nonprofit organization that mobilizes pro bono lawyers to actually stand up a nonprofit legal defense network. So, if anyone in our call today is either a lawyer who wants to volunteer or is works at a nonprofit organization that could use legal support in this way, you can go to nonprofitdefense.org, and we're actually providing pro bono legal help to nonprofits as well in this moment. Because it's like you said, when we think about democracy, when we think about our tools to fight back, a big one of those tools is the power of the people and the voice of the people, and that is why he is attacking civil society, because civil society are the ones who really channel and bring the voice of the people, right? So anything that we can do to be supportive, please do reach out, because we see it as our mission to support nonprofit organizations so that they can be louder and more bold.
So just to show you how small a world it is, and how Rachel and I didn't coordinate any of this. So I actually created We the Action. I was the
What?
yeah
How do I
I
not
was
know
the
this?
yeah. So We the Action was at the end of 2016. I had this idea when I saw all of the volunteer lawyers who were just flooding airports. And I
Right.
thought, there needs to be some organization, some tech slash legal group that matches the needs of nonprofit organizations with the outpouring of lawyers who want to help. Because one of the things that struck me about the scenes at the airports were, you know, what we needed was not 100 lawyers at JFK Airport. What we needed was 5 lawyers at JFK Airport and 95 lawyers at other airports, right? Like there was no like spreading all of the legal need across the nonprofit sector. And one of the things I always heard was that from lawyers who said, "Well, I'm not an expert in immigration, or I'm not or not a litigator," and I'd say, "Well, yeah, but if you know how to draft a lease or a contract, there are nonprofit organizations that need that too, right?" So there's
Yeah.
something that everyone can be doing to help nonprofit organizations. And so I'm thrilled that you are working with We the Action. I'm glad they're still up and going and doing important work. Um,
That's a full circle moment. I love that, Mark. And they also recently stood up a similar hub for federal employees who needed legal
yes.
help. So the roots of what you've built continue to grow, and we're thrilled to get to partner with them.
Well, that's great. Let me ask you a less thrilled question. So I've been a very strong critic of large law firms. I think that, in addition to the large law firms that have capitulated, you have dozens and dozens and dozens of other law firms that have not formally capitulated. But when people like you or your members need pro bono legal services, all of a sudden the law firm is busier, is too busy. They used to be more willing to help and they're less willing to help. And it is overall, in my view, an absolute tragedy of democracy that the legal profession, along with the media and some other large institutions, have not met this moment. So, from your standpoint, you know, you are obviously doing more with less, or I shouldn't say with less, but you're doing more and more and more with, I said this to someone recently. I'm like, I can't tell you the number, but it wouldn't surprise me if $1 billion of pro bono legal services have been pulled out of the process, like literally pulled out of
Yeah.
the. So you are having to deal with that reality for yourself and for other organizations. What do you think the progressive legal and advocacy community needs to do right now, given that reality, to push back?
Yeah, I think I join you in feeling saddened by many of our colleagues not standing up in this moment. And I do think, one of the things that's really important if we are going to be pushing back is having the resources, right? And so a big piece of this is if you're going to be loud and you're going to be bold in this moment, you got to be smart. You got to
Yep.
be strategic. You have to know, right? And so what we found is a lot of our really powerful grassroots organizations do not, they already do not have, excuse me, they already don't have the resources to have a general counsel on their team. And when you have the reduced access to pro bono legal help, how do they get that legal help and support to be able to know that they are in compliance, right? So that's why we're doubling down on that. We're also creating resources like we recently created a hub called Break in case of panic, like break glass in case of emergency, that links all of our resources specific to, if you are under political attack, here's what you can do, here's how you can sound the alarm and do it legally. So I think one piece is making sure that you have the resources and have, we in the progressive community have to be supporting each other and making sure that each other has the resources. I think the second part is standing in coalition and standing together, coming in spaces like this, which I know you've cultivated such a great community here at Democracy Docket that, that's so important because when we're together, we're reminded we're not alone, and then we are less likely to capitulate and we are stronger and bolder and more confident in the fight, right? So I think, those are two things: being strategic, finding community, and then the third is, I think, recognizing that this is a long game, right? I think for many
Yes.
of us who've
Yes.
been in, right, like who've been fighting for democracy for some time, it's hard to see the sliding back from even the minimal progress gained, and to then not get exhausted, right, in this moment. So I think it's also sort of taking a beat and recognizing when you need self-care and leaning on each other as well in this moment.
All right, so we are going to go to questions from the audience, and we already have a bunch. I mean, I'm looking at the little counter. There's already 90 questions, but here's the thing: the Democracy Docket team is going through these questions. They are collating them. They are trying to group them. So if you have a question, it is not too late to put in the Q&A box. Don't put it in the chat because we're not monitoring the chat for questions. We're monitoring the Q&A box for questions. So go ahead and add your questions there. But I'm going to kick off with the first grouping, which is that many of you are asking about Trump's judicial nominations. One way it was phrased was, are judicial nominations still flowing from or through the Federalist Society as they were during the first term, or has Trump cut out the Federalist Society and have a different pipeline? So you're the expert on this, Rachel. How are they finding these people? Is it the Federalist Society? Is it some other way? Like, what does that pipeline look like?
We're still seeing Federalist Society nominees, but like I said, it's sort of like there's this unspoken additional hurdle of demonstrating your loyalty to Donald Trump. So we are seeing nominees who have gone on the record to support certain things that Trump has said, or have been his lawyer, or have a clear demonstrated record that they are going to support this president over even ideological values and even a particular platform of views. But we're still seeing the relevance of the Federalist Society. I think there was a moment where we saw this spat between
Right.
Trump and the
That's
Federalists.
why it's such an
Right,
interesting
right.
question, right? We all saw that.
Right, right. We all saw that, and I think that's something commonly seen with Trump, that he's not afraid to sort of throw his allies under the bus at any time. But if you look at the nominees that we're continuing to see, we're still seeing a high number of Federalist Society nominees. So I think it remains to be seen what that continues to look like going forward, because it seems almost as though what we're looking for now, what this administration is looking for, is Federalist Society, ideologically conservative, plus demonstrate your loyalty.
Yeah, I just have to say, I graduated law school in 1993 and was lectured both as a law student and then lectured in private practice about how the Federalist Society and conservative judges, they were just originalists, they were just textualists, they were calling balls and strikes, they didn't have any political valence, there was no, it was just like the umpire, right? And like that's all kind of turned out to be bullshit, if you don't mind my language. I mean, it is hard to look at some of the rulings from the Supreme Court, Rachel, and say these are like textualists or
Right,
or originalists, right? It just seems like increasingly the courts, and particularly the even the worse, like the people coming out now, like they're not even conservative per se. They're just kind of like Trump loyalists, right?
right. I think that's exactly right. And, I encourage anyone who's digging into reading the SCOTUS rulings for yourself to really read the dissents, because I
Yeah,
do think that's where we're
smart,
seeing
smart.
Ketanji Brown Jackson, uh, Justice Sotomayor, they're spelling it out for us to make it clear what's really going on in these majority rulings. Because, like you said, there's still this sort of attempt to rely upon textualist originalism arguments, and we are seeing the other justices call them out. But you're right; it's incredibly troubling to see this loyalty through line, and also to see some of the nominees kind of saying we got to get rid of Humphrey's executor. We have to give the president this unbridled power, give him the power to fire heads of agencies, give him the power to essentially do what he wants to do. So it's very troubling.
Okay, our next question comes from Daniel, who asks about what can be done at the state level about all of the redistricting, mid-cycle redistricting illegalities. What do you tell Daniel?
I think it's a really complex question. One thing that I will say that we also work on at AFJ is the empowerment and the focus on state courts. I think
Mhm.
sometimes, especially with recent Supreme Court rulings that took away the power from federal courts to make rulings when it comes to redistricting, that the state courts are becoming increasingly important. So what we do at AFJ, we sort of work toward building the bench with movement lawyers the same way we do on the federal side with the state court as well. But we also focus on state Supreme Court elections, sometimes through the Alliance for Justice, sometimes through our partner organization, the Alliance for Justice Action Campaign. But there's, for example, a really important Supreme Court election next week, Philadelphia, right? Yeah.
I was gonna tee up. So tell them about it.
Yeah, so there is an important election just next week, a retention election for the Supreme Court justices in Philadelphia. And I think we all know Philadelphia is an incredibly important court and will decide incredibly important issues. But right now on the court, there is a three Democratic justice majority, and those three seats are up for retention election. So we will see how that plays out and what happens in that election. But
Yeah, and this is
yeah,
Pennsylvania. This is the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court, and anyone who has
right.
followed the the seemingly endless litigation that I and others have been involved in Pennsylvania about different ways that Republicans have tried to disqualify mail-in ballots know how important those elections are. So if you live in Pennsylvania, make sure you vote. Just as, by the way, if you're anywhere in the country and you have elections in November, the most important thing anyone can do is vote. And doesn't matter whether those are partisan or nonpartisan elections. Doesn't matter whether it's state or very localized. There are no federal elections, obviously, this time. But your vote is your voice, and so please make sure if you're in Pennsylvania or anywhere in the country, you take an opportunity there. All right, there is no case that I get asked more about, Rachel, than what Rick asks about, and this is the immunity decision. People are really upset about the immunity decision, and for good reason. I mean, I think jurisprudentially it's bad law. It has had tragic consequences already for our democracy and in the foreseeable future. So, he asks, does a new case have to come before the Supreme Court for it to be revisited? Can the Supreme Court modify its own decision based on what is happening? Obviously, I can answer that part. A new case does have to come forward. The Supreme Court can't just on its own announce a new policy. But what do you tell people who are just beside themselves about the impact of this immunity decision?
Yeah, I would say I'm with you. I think it is incredibly troubling, especially when going back to the broader trend of what we're seeing, right? The immunity case, which essentially handed the keys to Trump to do whatever he wants to do. Then, the birthright citizenship case that weakened the ability of lower courts to be able to hold him accountable, right? So it is a trend that is incredibly troubling, and I think people are right to be very disappointed about it. And I'll also say this, we've got judicial nominees who are standing up for that case. One of the more recent nominees was a litigator in support on that case. So, there is this increasing trend. And my fear would be that, this Supreme Court goes even further to empower the executive branch.
This is the reason why everyone's got to check out their website, because like I know a lot about AFJ. I've used their resources going back, I hate to tell you, Rachel, going back to the mid 1990s when I was an associate looking for good resources to help form nonprofit organizations, to help do best practices for nonprofit organizations, which may not sound, by the way, nearly as interesting as, Supreme Court stuff, but AFJ really is the benchmark setter in how nonprofit sort of operate in the world. And the fact is that I wouldn't even have any way of knowing that someone who is being nominated for the federal bench was a lawyer in that case, but for the fact that you tell me this is something your organization tracks. And that is like an unbelievably important resource. But let me ask you about what Bruce wants to know. So he asks if the Supreme Court is about to dismantle Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, would that decision come out to allow time before the midterms or not? And I think that there are like two benchmarks here that maybe are worth getting your reaction on. The first is I always point out that this case in Louisiana was argued last term and seemed like a relatively easy case for the Supreme Court to reject, the claims. Instead, they ordered it to be re-argued on broader grounds. In other words, to potentially strike down Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. That is not a good sign. The last time I remember that happening was a campaign finance case that I followed very closely, because many people know I'm also a campaign finance lawyer. In fact, I'm arguing campaign finance case in the U.S. Supreme Court in December. And that case was Citizens United, which was argued and then re-argued at the very beginning of the term and then came out on January 10th. So that would speak to an early decision. The other thing people hear, though, all the time, Rachel, is that the biggest, most important cases get decided in June or early July, and that would perhaps be too late. What do you? I know it's impossible to read tea leaves, but what do you suspect we're gonna see with respect to this Section 2, this Louisiana versus Calais case, and the timing and what it might mean for redistricting?
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't
None of
have a
us know.
crystal ball, right? But I do. I think you're right that this is, it's troubling, and we have to look at this timeline. I also think, there's going to be wider implications for this case going forward that we also have to think about when we look at other redistricting efforts. Especially when we look at how redistricting efforts continue, we just find out about them every day right now in this moment. So I don't know if I could say specifically what the impact would be on the midterm elections, but I do think we have to watch and see.
All right. We have time for one last question, and we have a bunch of people who have asked this question. And so Heather asks it in one formulation that I'll use. What can I do as an average citizen to affect change? She says she lives in a democratic, what she calls a safe state, which I'm going to assume, what that means, but take it as you want, Rachel. But people feel helpless. They feel like they don't know what they can do. They see their neighbors being dragged away and sent to foreign gulags. They see the White House literally being demolished. They see a president that is lawless. They see courts that don't seem to want to hold him to account. So I'm sure you get this question all the time. What do you tell, as Rachel said, average citizens to do?
First of all, I love that question. And I would say the first thing is to find your lane because it's so easy to get overwhelmed and to see all of these different largely concerning actions across, decimating rights and institutions. So step one is you can't do it all. So finding one place to plug in and knowing that you can put your skills to use somewhere that's enough, and that's a good thing to do. So AFJ, you can get involved with us. Some of the things that we do, we regularly will holding court events where you can get educated and understand what's coming up with soon to come SCOTUS decisions. Follow us on social media and help amplify the messaging. One of the things that we also try to get folks involved in is, understanding who these judicial nominees are, and you can call your senators. That is something that every member of the public can do is call your senators and tell them which way they should be voting on these nominees. There is a lot that public pressure and that organizations can do to bring light to these issues and to really hold accountable and stand against these nominees. We've seen, with judicial nominees, we've seen, on the Bovee nomination, 2 Republicans voted no, which is something, not what we wanted. But we're also seeing with other nominees, some of them are being stopped, and it's because of public pressure. It's because of people getting engaged. You can also find local grassroots organizations that you can plug into, get engaged with. And yeah, finding the place that you can land and support and bring your voice to the table is critical, but also recognizing that you can't do it all is really important.
All right. Well, look, we've had, several thousand people on this call. Several thousand more people are going to get this video. And so I just want to deliver a straight message to all of you. This event is part of Democracy Docket's ongoing effort to educate you about democracy and the courts. That is why I started Democracy Docket in 2020, and it's been part of our mission ever since. And this event would not have been possible without AFJ and its support, and so many of the resources that the nonprofit community, the pro-democracy community rely upon are built out by and supported by AFJ. So I want to not only thank Rachel for her leadership and for the incredible work that Alliance Justice for doing, but I want to implore everyone who is watching this live or is watching this on video to go to their website, to follow them across all of their platforms, and to support them in any way you can. That may be financial for some of you, that may be joining their mailing list for others, it may be reposting their social media, whatever it is, but get the word out, because this is truly one of the real good guy organizations. People ask me which are the ones to support, and I'm telling you, AFJ needs to be on that list because it is doing such important work and fearless work at a time when there are too many people and too many organizations that are cowards. So I want to thank Rachel, you for joining us tonight. I want to thank you for all of the work that AFJ is doing. I want to thank everyone else who has joined us tonight as part of this important conversation. And if you are not already a subscriber to Democracy Docket, please go ahead and do that as well. Together, we can fight against authoritarianism, we can fight for democracy, and we can protect our courts. And so, Rachel, Rossi, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Mark. It's such a delight to be with you. Thanks for your leadership and all the great work you do.